Today I want to briefly go over the forms of the first and second declension in Greek. So let's dive right in. So the first declension, basically again, at some point, those who organized the Greek grammar took all Greek nouns, I'm talking about New Testament Greek, and they put them into baskets that fit with their forms. So the first group, or we call it the first declension, are mostly feminine nouns. There are a few that look feminine, but they're actually masculine. But the first declension was mostly feminine nouns, just a few masculines, not very many, but a few masculines. And what these nouns had in common, the reason why they were put in the same basket, is because their endings tended to have alphas and etas in them. So the first declension. The default, I'm saying the default, so we're going to have a singular and plural, and then the cases. So the nominative, graphe, or the plural, graphi, again, alphas and etas. So graphe is nominative, singular, and then graphi is nominative, plural. Okay, so one would be Scripture says, and the other one would be Scriptures say. Genitive, graphes, of a scripture, or the plural, graphon, of scriptures. Dative, to a scripture, or to scriptures. Accusative, I see scripture, graphein, or I see scriptures, graphos. Now, the vocative in almost every case of a noun, pretty much almost every noun, it's true that the nominative and the vocative look the same, and that's true for this one, so I don't believe I put down the vocative. Okay, so if you go down, we have ace, ain, and the subscript is important, and then I, own, ice, as for the plural. Okay, so that's the default for the first declension. Variation number one. So variation number one, basically instead of having etas in the singular, it has all alphas in the singular, just like the plural, pretty much. So here's variation two. Hora, so it's going to be a, as, an, and then the plural is going to be exactly the same. I, own, ice, as. So if you look at the difference between the default and variation one, the plural is going to be exactly the same endings. And then the singular is going to be almost exactly the same, except instead of etas, we have all alphas. Why does it do this? Well, the key is that the stem is going to end in an epsilon, an iota, or a rho, and that cues it to do this alpha option as opposed to the eta option. Variation 2. Variation 2 can't make up its mind whether it wants to go with all etas or with all alphas, and our model here is the word doxa. So doxa does alphas in the nominative, so we have doxa and doxai, and then for whatever reason it decides to do etas, at least in the singular, for the genitive and dative, doxes, doxe, again, subscript's important, and then it's the same in the plural, and then the accusative goes back to an alpha in the singular, and it's alpha in the plural. So the plural, you'll notice that the plural for these three, for all of the variations, all the default and the two variations I've given you so far, the plural is all the same. What's different is the singular, as to sometimes it has etas and sometimes it has alphas. Okay, so let's move to our final two variations. The first is a masculine variation, where it looks feminine, but it's actually masculine. So prophetes has an eta, and it has an alpha in the plural. So prophet, this word looks like it should be feminine. If you remember that alphas and etas are the first declension, and they tend to be feminine, your first thought is maybe this should be feminine, but it's not. It's masculine. In fact, we know in the genitive, the oo that shows up there kind of reveals its true colors, that it's actually a masculine word. But most of it looks the same. The only thing that's different are these two. Well, the main things that are different are these two. And I learned the first thing that's different with the vocabulary, and then the oo, I'm used to oo being a genitive masculine singular ending anyway, because of other endings I'm going to show you in a second. So it's pretty much the same. It's just a masculine word. Doesn't make a big deal as far as the meaning. It's just a masculine word masquerading as a feminine. Now the vocative, again, is a little different. Normally the vocative looks the same in the nominative as the nominative, but here it reveals its alpha there. So I put the vocative here because that's a little different. There's another variation that is not really important, but just to be complete with the first declension, there is another masculine variation, and the word neos, young man, gives us an example of this. Notice that while prophetes had an eta sigma in the nominative, neos has an alpha sigma in the nominative. It looks pretty much the same as prophetes, except it has alphas as opposed to etas. And you might have almost predicted this. So this is a masculine noun that is mostly etas in the singular. Well, this is a masculine noun that's just basically alphas in the singular. And the reason is because the stem ends in neota. Remember, epsilon, neota, rho go all alphas. And again, just like prophetes, in the genitive singular it reveals its true colors, and the vocative, it goes to just an alpha. You don't need to know this one. In fact, feel free to completely forget you saw this slide if it's throwing you off. Okay, so the second declension. The second declension is actually easier than the first declension. The Greek textbooks that I started off with actually had the second declension first. I think that's good pedagogy. But apologies to the feminines out there. But if the first declension is mostly feminine, with just a few masculine pretenders, the second declension is mostly masculine, with a few that are actually feminine, and then it has a significant number of neuter nouns as well. So let's go to the default, something you've already memorized. So let's use logos. So if the first declension is alpha and etas, the second declension is omicrons and omegas. So there's logos, or logoi, lagu, lagon, o, on. Okay, so as, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. There you have it, the masculine. And then the vocative I put down because this is different here. The vocative masculine singular of the second declension has an e. And I always remember that because of the song, Kyrie eleison on the road that I must travel. So Kyrie is a vocative. Lord, Lord, have mercy. So that's where that epsilon comes from. Okay, there are some similarities between the first and second declensions here. So for example, the plural in the first declension was I, alpha iota. Here it's omicron iota. In the first declension it was ice, alpha iota sigma. Second declension it's ois, omicron iota sigma. First declension is as, alpha sigma. Second declension is omicron upsilon sigma. And so there are some similarities. We have a subscript in the dative singular, just like we had an eta with a subscript or an alpha with a subscript. And in the first declension we have alpha nu, and so here in the second declension we have omicron nu. So if you switch out the alphas for omicrons, that is almost gets us to the second declension here. So this is word, of a word, to a word. I see a word. Words talk, of words, to words. I speak words, and so forth. So there you have the default of the second declension. Now, our variation number one is the feminines. So how do the feminines of the second declension look? They look exactly the same. And so if you look at the difference between the default and variation number one, this word is feminine, eremos, which means desert. There is absolutely no difference in form between this feminine word and this masculine word. So how do I know the difference? Well, when I learn the vocabulary, I memorize it. I memorize it because the vocabulary is going to tell me this takes a feminine article and this is a feminine word. So it's going to take adjectives with feminine endings. So there's no difference in form here. It's just I have to memorize when I learned this word that it's not really masculine. It's going to look masculine everywhere. Its endings are going to look exactly the same, but I'm going to know that in its heart of hearts it's actually a feminine word, and that's just memorization. So that's variation 1, and it's pretty easy. Now, variation 2 are the neuters, and I'm sorry it didn't unfold in a kind of quick way. There it is. It's all right there. You'll notice that the neuters are pretty much the same as the masculine, except in a few places. Let me show you where it's the same. So in the genitive and the dative, neuters are always the same as the masculine. Another thing about the neuters is, with neuter words, the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative are going to always look exactly the same. This is something you can bank on, and there aren't that many things that you can say that about in Greek, that it's always a certain way. But the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative of a neuter are always going to look the same. And so it's on in the singular, and it's a neuter plural alpha. There's another always. There's always an alpha hiding somewhere in a neuter plural nominative or accusative. Most of the time it's obvious, it's right there. So remember this phrase, neuter plural alpha. It shows up in the nominative and the accusative and the vocative. Here's another one. The genitive and dative forms for a second declension neuter always looks the same as the genitive and dative of a second declension masculine. So those are things that you can bank on. So really, the neuters shouldn't cause you too much trouble, because it's just basically a couple little variations on the masculine. And there you have it, the first and second declension forms for nouns in Greek. And so if you learn the form, the song that I did for, I didn't put it out here, but remember the adjective song that I've taught you, that captures all the first and second declension forms in an adjective chart. And it goes as, a, on, u, as, u, o, a, o, on, ein, on, as, a, on, u, as, u, o, a, o, on, ein, on, oi, I, a, on, on, ois, eis, ois, us, as, a, oi, I, a, on, ois, eis, ois, us, as, a. That basically, if you know that song, then you know all the endings, the main endings that you need to know for the first and second declension nouns as well.